Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for this Achates live session, which has been pre-recorded for broadcast on Thursday, the 13th of February. Today, we're going to be talking about taking a purpose-led approach to income generation. My name's Deborah Larwood, and I'm the Director of Income Generation here at Achates. We're a cultural sector consultancy company supporting commercial and contributed income generation, impact measurement, evaluation, business planning and strategy at an organisation and policy level, as well as leadership development, change management and recruitment. Our monthly webinar series of Achates Live takes a deep dive into various key topics and areas of focus or challenge in both the contributed and earned income generation spaces. And whilst, of course, we acknowledge that Achates doesn't necessarily have all the answers, what we do have is an overview of the sector itself, and we're really passionate about using this perspective and role in a supportive way. Finally, just to say that, as always, all of the information shared in today's conversation is, of course, live and correct at the time of broadcast. Now, I'm really delighted to be able to welcome our special guests this afternoon, who are going to be exploring this topic of the purpose-led approach to income generation with me today. Firstly, Edward Appleyard, the Chief Executive of Thackeray Medical Museum, where he joined the team in January of 2023. His passion for connecting people with culture as a means of discovery, inspiration, enjoyment, discussion and debate is something which the Thackeray wholly embodies in its approach and values, having been a finalist in the 2021 Art Fund Museum of the Year Awards and the only UK museum represented at the 2023 European Museum of the Year Awards, where his team received a special commendation. Having worked in arts and culture for nearly 25 years, Edward's passion for creating connections has been borne out throughout this time, including the successful rebrand and repositioning of Harewood House Trust in North Leeds and the award-winning rebrand of the London Symphony Orchestra on the arrival of Sir Simon Rattle back to the UK. The leadership of the orchestra's annual free concert in Trafalgar Square to 7,000 people, working alongside BMW, and numerous commitments to communities and learning projects, and his ability to be a consistent change maker. He is also the chair of the Culture Consortium Leeds, which brings together 28 partners in the city to help support the city's cultural ambitions. A very warm welcome to you, Edward.
Thank you so much, Deborah. It's an absolute delight to be here. I feel like this topic is particularly pertinent right now. There's so much going on, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Fabulous. Thank you, Edward. Secondly, on our panel today is Lisa Ramsell, Director of Development at RADA. Lisa brings over 25 years of experience in fundraising, marketing and business development, both here in the UK and in New Zealand, where she's worked in both the commercial and not-for-profit sectors. Organisations that Lisa has played a role in include the Royal Shakespeare Company, English National Ballet, Variety, the children's charity, and the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra. It's really lovely to have you with us today. Welcome, Lisa.
Hello. Hello. Thank you, Deborah. Great to be here. Really looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Lisa. And thirdly, our panellist today, completing our panel, is Steph Dewar, Director of Development at the Watermill Theatre. Now, Steph joined the Watermill as Development Director in May of 2023, which was just 6 months after the organisation learned that it would be receiving a 100% cut to its Arts Council England NPO funding. Prior to the Watermill, Steph has worked in a number of different regional arts centres, as well as in the wider third sector, working for Reading Mencap, a local charity supporting people with learning disabilities. It's great to have you here, Steph, and I'm really looking forward to having this discussion with you today, so welcome.
Hello, Deborah. Thank you. I'm really excited to be part of the conversation too.
Before we jump into the questions that I'm excited to put to the panel today, a little bit of an introduction, perhaps. Now, whether you're working on your fundraising strategy or thinking about new ways to earn money in your organisation, I think what always sits at the core of this process of thinking, planning and shaping what your approach will look like is your organisation's purpose. What you're doing, the work you create, the audiences that you deliver that work for and with, and the change that this in turn will bring about. So the organisational purpose is really the North Star. And understanding and clarifying that organisational purpose, I think, is therefore really critical for every cultural organisation. And it creates that shared frame of reference for all of your decision making. So the purpose, therefore, serves as something of a blueprint. It offers you clarity on the what, the why, the how, and this clarity should in turn help to guide your thinking and decision making about which income sources and which approaches you might take to drawing that income in, all in ways which fully align with that organisational purpose. And of course, fundraising, after all, is the drawing together of supporters and donors and partners who are helping you to enable and further that organisational impact. Your impact is their impact. Your achievements are theirs as well. And as well as offering financial support towards enabling that purpose to be achieved, there might be other ways that those partners and sponsors and philanthropists can really help an organisation to reach beyond its own ability to further that purpose. Perhaps if supporters are connected to your priority audiences or can help you to raise the visibility of your work and connect more people with it as a result. So whilst on the face of it, the challenge to solve might be articulated as how do we raise the funds needed to enable us to enact our plans and deliver our work? I think the question really is, what opportunities are there that we can pursue to generate income in ways which furthers our purpose? And I believe that it's this alternative provocation that invites us to think more creatively and also more holistically about income generation. And it also, importantly, emphasises the relationships and the roles that our supporters, donors, funders and partners can really play beyond the money. Now, I'm really delighted, as I say, to welcome our esteemed panel into this conversation today. And I've got a number of questions that I'm really looking forward to putting to the group. But before I do that, I'm going to hand over to each panellist in turn and really invite them to introduce their organisation, but to tell us a little bit about what taking that purpose-led approach means in their work. Edward, if I could come to you first, please.
Absolutely, Deborah, and thank you. Well, I'm delighted to be able to introduce the Thackeray Museum of Medicine to you all. The Thackeray is an absolutely wonderful place, and it's the largest independent medical museum in the UK with such a unique collection, which is born out of the Thackeray Medical Company, which was one of the biggest traders of medical manufacture in the world, bought out by Johnson & Johnson DePuy in the late 1980s, and still kind of family run at the time of its sale, amassing a significant collection, not just from its own medical manufacture, but from other medical manufacturers as well, which has been bestowed to us as an organisation. And we're really proud of that. There's 75,000 objects in our collection, 50,000 items, 25,000 books and catalogues, everything you can imagine, from the very first dialysis machine that was brought to Leeds, actually to the UK, but Leeds was the first to host it, and things like prescription books and everything else that you just wouldn't think would tell such a rich story of medical heritage in this country and the people that we've worked with. We currently welcome around 70,000 visitors a year, which is absolutely brilliant for us. We went through a big capital redevelopment sadly during COVID, but across 2020 and 2021 to a delayed opening in May 2021. Significant investment from National Lottery Heritage Fund, Arts Council England, Wilson Foundation, Garfield Weston, amongst many other generous individual givers, and a trust that was set up from the sale of the Thackeray Company, the Thackeray Medical Research Trust. And that's put us in really good stead in terms of having a modern, forward-thinking approach to our building, which is welcoming. It's about community. It's values-driven in that participation is first and foremost, democratization is first and foremost in our building, so that we don't just display items. The items are associated with stories amassed from 220 participants. Everything from the hospital next door to us, St James's University Hospital, to our local community. We sit just outside the city centre, but in one of the most diverse council wards in Leeds, but also one of the most deprived council wards in Leeds. And we're really committed to that community. It's a real passion of ours. Having a subject like medicine and medical history has a brilliant perspective for learning through all sorts of ways, both formal and informal. And we're really proud of the fact that about a third of our visitors a year actually come from schools. A lot of what you see across the museum is part of the national curriculum. And so we are a place of inspiration, discussion and debate and so much more. And something where we can really think and provoke about the future, but also deal with and talk about difficult topics right now, like social inclusion, diversity, gender, ethnicity, how people have been treated differently in the past, how people have been treated differently now, and what we can look towards for the future. So we've got a really unique lens to see the world. And medicine is one of the very few things in our lives that all of us will have participated in at some point. I mean, we've all been born, not that we remember it, but virtually everyone watching will have been to the GP at some point or had some kind of medical intervention. And through that, we all have a lived experience, which is unlike other art forms or other cultural activities, which people have to be a bit more active in, or is something that they're directed towards by others. Our organisation is just becoming more and more purpose and values led. And for me, that's all to the better. We've just been through a 12-month project supported by National Artery Heritage Fund, which has been all about our organisational resilience and sustainability going forward. And a big part of that was establishing a positioning strategy. So that's working out who we are, what makes us unique, and how we want to be reflected both internally into the outside world. We've done a huge amount of audience research, not necessarily about the people just coming to the museum currently or having been in the past, but also people that haven't been to the museum or interacted with us is just as important, and how they're represented and what the gaps are in our offer and the barriers to attendance are really important. And we've also done quite a lot around the basic things like pricing, income diversification, and some of those business essentials, which are really at the root of sustainability and resilience, but they cannot be contemplated without that values-driven approach. So our pricing model, which we will be introducing from April, is very much values-driven. It's much more about accessibility. It's about embracing our local community, but it's also about deepening an engaging relationship with those that can support us more, trying to encourage some base level of philanthropy, and just building a much richer relationship with our community in its widest possible sense.
Thank you so much, Edward. Fantastic. What a great introduction. And also what an absolutely fascinating asset to have in the UK and certainly in Leeds. I was really taken with what you said about that democratization is first and foremost. And certainly, you know, here at Achates, we are very much committed to the democratization of philanthropy and that notion that anybody can be a philanthropist, whether they are giving financially, giving of their time, giving of their skills, expertise, etc., etc. And also, you know, what you were saying about sort of the business model being values and purpose led, and that interesting point you're making about accessibility, and I guess thinking about the fact that, you know, some audiences will bring their lived experience into the organisation, others might bring a financial contribution, and it's that sort of holistic understanding of those different groups that your organisation is engaging with and how they are enriching your work, informing your work, and helping you to drive that purpose forward. So I'm excited to come back and dig into some questions with you. But before we do that, let's move along to Lisa. I'd love to hear a little bit about your organisation and your perspective on that purpose-led approach.
Thanks, Deborah. Great to be involved in this conversation today, as I said. And at RADA, we are, we're transforming the next generation of talent for the creative industries. And we do this through our vocational training for actors, for stage managers, designers, and technical stagecraft specialists. But, you know, we're a very small specialist academy, and we're focused on developing the individual potential in a very bespoke way. And we are really focused on nurturing socially conscious creative practitioners for the future. That's our purpose, and that feeds directly into the approach that we take in our fundraising. So our fundraising is all about bespoke engagement. It's about being impact centric and focused on developing a culture of philanthropy. My team's a very small fundraising and alumni engagement team, and we've recently grown from just 5 team members to 7, and we have a couple of freelancers as well. So we have to think carefully about, where we're putting our efforts, and our focus is firmly on the income areas where we see the best return on investment. It has to be. So trusts and foundations, major donors, large corporate and industry partnerships, and on legacies. That's where we put the majority of our time. And over the past 18 months, we've taken the time to really reflect on our organisational values, to think about the deep impact that we have on lives, how we want to shape this academy for the future. And during that time, we've taken the time to develop a theory of change model and a case for support that really captures that vision and that purpose. And that now very well-defined purpose does act as our guiding star for how we engage with our supporters, with our prospects, and with our advocates. And it's it's quickly become the cornerstone of the fundraising activity. And I say becoming that because that implementation is ongoing. Developing that culture of philanthropy takes time, and things like refining our supporter engagement activity, our communications, and all of our events related to that. That takes time. So that's rolling out at the moment, and the income that we're raising is all in support of that core organisational purpose and all of the related projects and programs that we've got in our 5-year business plan.
Great, thank you very much, Lisa. I think there's something really interesting as well, and you mentioned there within your fundraising, your contributed revenue, that you're working with industry partners, and I suppose sort of nodding back to what I mentioned a little earlier on, thinking about whilst those partners will hopefully and absolutely will bring that investment that is much needed to enable the organisation to deliver its work. But there are also lots of other opportunities within those sorts of relationships that really speak to the purpose that RADA has as an organisation, and how those partners can play a really meaningful role, perhaps to help the organisation to reach further than its current or ability or capacity and resource may allow. I really liked what you said about how you are reflecting that organisational purpose and that commitment to developing the next generation of talent and socially conscious individuals in the ways in which you work with your philanthropists and supporters. You're sort of mirroring that in the way that you fundraising, and the theory of change approach. We are absolutely huge advocates for that here at Achates, and I think what's really interesting is maintaining that ability and that agility to be able to reflect back into the theory of change how what's happening outside of the organisation might serve to adjust or refine or perhaps pivot some of the ways in which an organisation is doing its work. Because of course, whilst we are sort of thinking about the organisation's purpose, we cannot think about that in isolation. We have to think about what's happening in the wider world, and there has to be that ongoing sort of dialogue, I guess, between the two. So thank you very much, Lisa. Steph, tell us a little bit about the Watermill and your feelings on that purpose, that approach to your income generation.
So the Watermill is it's a regional producing theatre in West Berkshire. We are very rural. We're located in a converted watermill in idyllic grounds, and we produce sort of between 7 and 8 shows a year. About half of those then go on to have a future life, so either on tour in the West End or further afield. We have audiences of about 60,000 across the year. And we've got a really extensive outreach program as well that provides over 17,000 opportunities a year for adults and young people to engage in the arts, both sort of on developing performance and production skills, but also using the arts to improve and enrich their daily lives. So for young people that have got disabilities, those from low socioeconomic backgrounds, or people that have got other challenges in their lives. obviously we lost our MPO funding in November 2022, and that really, really changed the way the organisation had to think about everything. I obviously wasn't there at that point in time, but I came in shortly after. And it was a really useful time to join the organisation, I think, because we very quickly then started working with you, Deborah. And we looked at creating a theory of change, identifying who are our audiences, what are their needs, and how do we serve them. And from that, we developed a statement of purpose. And I think that was so key for us at that point in the organisation's life, because we were sort of on this precipice of huge change, and actually having this statement of purpose really enabled us to make sure that we were sharp in our focus. We had to be really, really clear about what our priorities are. Any activity that doesn't serve our purpose just doesn't make the grade, because it can't. And we're much more rigorous in our fundraising as well. I think for us, it's sharpened everything that we do. When we look at project funding in particular, where again, we're very, very focused now on making sure that every project that we look at funding really, really aligns with that purpose. We create logic models for everything that we're considering doing, which is really helpful, because then we can really interrogate those. And that's actually really helped our outreach team, because before we lost the funding, there was perhaps not quite so much of a need to be quite so focused and ruthless, perhaps, in the way that we approach what we're doing. But that's been a really, really useful process. And I think, particularly as a fundraising team, with huge pressure and huge targets to achieve, you can sometimes end up in sort of chasing funding, perhaps, whereas this approach now with our statement of purpose means that we are really, really rigorous in going, actually, we need to fund the work that is really important to us and that will serve these audiences well, and in the best way that we can as an organisation, rather than because it's an available funding pot, which is the temptation sometimes. So yeah, we've got a much clearer place for support. It's much easier to align with those trusts. In terms of our approach to donors, I think we've made some big changes there as well in the last couple of years. We've completely sort of reinvented our membership programs in the last year, and we've removed all benefits associated with those packages. So there used to be quite a fixed structure in terms of what transactional benefits people received for their membership, and we've completely got rid of all of that now. So it's very philanthropic. Donors are donating because they want to support our work rather than because they want to receive the benefits attached to that program. And again, it's a very slow process. There's always more work to do. But what we've seen is actually a real change in the last year in that our donors are evolving into a much more engaged group now, which is really exciting. We are having to make sure that we're being really, really clear in how we're articulating what the impact of their support is, which means in turn that they are then getting clearer comms from us in terms of what impact their donation's having. We've completely revamped our events program so that we're providing lots more opportunities to share and celebrate the impact of their donation with them. And we're starting to see the results, which is quite exciting. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Steph. I think, it's not an sort of understatement to say that shift in core, revenue funding, of course, that the organisation was in receipt in, a seismic change for the organisation, as you say, and yet also a very, very valuable moment of clarity, and I think it's clear from what you've shared with us today that the organisation has taken that knotty challenge and has really flipped it on its head and has taken the opportunity to be forensic about the organisational purpose, to be disciplined about the choices that you're going to make going forwards. And music to my ears, of course, to hear that you're continuing to use that process of logic modelling, for example, to stress test ideas. I think as well, in the cultural sector, it's a wonderful quality, but I think we are often open to lots of ideas and we get excited about lots of ideas. And there is a real discipline that we need as a sector because we haven't got infinite resources, sadly. So we have to be able to analyse and to determine whether or not certain activities are going to serve that purpose, or because otherwise we could just spend a lot of time going in myriad different directions and probably struggle along the way. And so I think hearing the way that your organisation has used that moment in time to double down on its purpose, to ensure that you've got a really clear decision-making framework and shared understanding of that purpose, has clearly enabled the organisation to then go on and make some really fantastically well-judged decisions about the programmes of work you deliver, and also where you're fundraising and how you're fundraising. And the last thing that I wanted to touch on, that I'd love to spend a bit more time with the wider panel thinking about, is how you have also built that relationship with your supporter base to focus them on that impact and to bring them closer to the success and the difference that they're helping to make. And I think, testament to how well you've done that you've been able to mobilise that membership base, for example, and move away from that historic sort of more transactional relationship, perhaps, into something which feels fundamentally philanthropic. They are part of the change that you're bringing about. Thank you for sharing that introduction with us. Okay, so let's jump in to some questions I'm really excited to explore with you all. The first thing I want to sort of dig back into, I guess, and we've touched on it a little bit already, is the ways in which the organisational purpose should guide and also inform the way that an organisation fundraises. And I wonder, what your thoughts are about how that purpose should play its role in that thinking and planning and in the direction of travel that an organisation goes in. Lisa, could I come to you first on that and get your thoughts, please?
Yeah, sure. I just think it's vital. It's that organizational purpose that gives the laser focus for so many areas, but of course for our fundraising efforts, our strategic plan directly supports that purpose and outlines how we're collectively committing to that. So for the fundraising team, that purpose just gives meaning and direction to the work, keeps us on track. I think it needs to do that. And it keeps that core focus on our societal impact, which is of course attractive and compelling to supporters who share that vision, which is what we want to achieve. So yeah, definitely vital.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, I think there's something about sort of identifying the supporters and partners who share that vision, who share that commitment to your organisational purpose. Does that ring true in your organisation, Edward, would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to say, I think the FACRE is in a bit of an infancy in terms of its fundraising journey outside of publicly available funds like National Lottery Heritage Fund and some of the very big trusts and foundations. But all of this chimes exactly with the current activity at the museum. And obviously, I think the very first question is who you are and what you want to do and what you want to achieve and what's your impact going to be, before you even think about how that funding conversation or how that income diversification model is going to pan out. Because as soon as you start to diversify from that purpose and values driven approach, you're actually just diverting from yourself as an organisation and what you want your development journey to be, which is, I think, it's difficult to bear in mind when we are also cash stricken, which is a harsh reality of what's going on right now, not least since the last budget delivered last autumn. But things aren't getting any easier. And actually, the idea of chasing funding that's available to you that you just happen to be eligible to apply for really now seems to be going out the window, not least because the success rate on applying for those kind of funds seems to be about 1 in 50, whereas you might have stood a 1 in 10 chance, perhaps pre-COVID and maybe in the aftermath thereafter. So your only option is to be purpose driven and work with an engaging relationship, whether it's through corporate relationships, philanthropy, with other trusts and foundations, of how you can meet commonality. That is the only way forwards.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Edward. And I'm conscious that, as you say, in terms of fundraising within your organisation, that it has historically been sort of more sort of trusts and foundations and statutory income.
Yeah.
Of course, you mentioned earlier about your thinking about your pricing model, and I guess I'd be really interested to ask you how you have used your organisational purpose as a sort of guiding force as you've been thinking about your income diversification across all income, including earned. How has your purpose sort of steered you through some of that thinking and decision making?
I mean, to be honest, it's fairly obvious when you say it out loud, no matter how much research you put into some of these kind of things, you know, it's always reassuring, isn't it, when you get the answer that you wanted. A pricing, no matter what art form or cultural organisation you might have been in the past, was invariably used to fill a budget hole. As were admission targets, whether you're doing concerts, theatre or otherwise. And that's not really the right approach to take anymore, particularly when you're looking at your audiences and trying to have more engaging relationships with them. And also giving them some kind of ownership and engagement in what you do is really important. So rather than, and also we're not about to start means testing people that come into the building, but we are going to give people choice, and it's people owning their own agency and decision making around some of these kind of things. So the model that we're going to open up from April will actually be a kind of choose your own price from a set of fixed prices. We'd be very happy if you want to come to the museum and pay the most basic price, which will give you a very accessible point of entry. We'd also love it if you want to up that a bit to give us a gift aid donation on top for that individual entry, or you can choose to pay it forwards, considering the position of our museum within our community for Leeds, and actually just some of the things that we're trying to do as an organisation in terms of having those difficult conversations, but also around health and well-being, and the opportunity to engage with and look after society. And I think that's something that we're all feeling, and people in this country are actually very, very generous when you give them simple opportunities like that. It's not a big commitment. You're not asking anybody to sign something away or that kind of model, but it is giving people ownership and awareness of that charitable message beyond just getting an activity to do for an afternoon. And building a richer engagement with it too. And hopefully we'll give people a sense of personal reward for having done so.
Thank you, Edward. Yeah, I think it's really interesting to hear. And, you know, just as you were talking then about sort of the messaging around those different price points, it's interesting to think about how you then, the pay it forward example is great because it's how you are connecting that individual with what that additional spend could result in, what it will mean, beyond it being money that is going to the organisation, of course, as the conduit, the connecting machine between the collection that you hold and the public. Actually, you're able to use that messaging to really contextualize and bring to life the impact that they could have by choosing, if they're able to and have the propensity, choosing that higher level admission price. Steph, I'd love to come to you on this question as well before we move on, and particularly just bearing in mind what you were telling us earlier about the outreach work, for example, and that sort of dual focus on the very young people, people with learning difficulties and adults. And I wonder if there's anything in sort of those areas of work that has actually steered the ways in which you are fundraising, perhaps the sources of income you're going to, or how you're approaching that income generation to support that work.
Yeah, I think that's definitely, again, changed quite a bit in the last couple of years. I think sort of historically, you know, our artistic work and perhaps the outreach work sort of weren't maybe as connected as they perhaps are. We're working towards getting them now. And I think that definitely has an impact on funding. I mean, in terms of funding that work specifically, the outreach work was funded very separately, whereas now that's not quite so much the case, which means that when we're looking for sort of core organisational funding, we are much better now at sharing what that work is and what the impact of that work is with those funders. Whereas historically that hasn't necessarily happened. And I think the same with individual donors. You know, we've done a lot of work this year to try and get better at articulating our impact to our donors. And again, there's an awful lot of people that have perhaps supported us for a really long time, but are not really very aware of the outreach work that happens because they support us because they enjoy our artistic work. So we've worked really, really hard to broaden that, and in particular, sort of through our events program for donors, we do a lot more now in terms of bringing them in. You know, one example we've done fairly recently is we had a season launch event where we brought a lot of donors in, shared with them details of the upcoming shows sort of in advance of announcing them publicly. It was a lovely, exciting event for them. And at that event actually brought in some young people from our outreach program and got them to talk with our donors about, you know, what impact being part of our program has on them, and what it means to them. And that's had a huge impact because there's, you know, people that I know have been very intimately acquainted with the Watermill as donors for years, coming up to us and saying, gosh, that was fantastic. I had no idea that that work was happening. So I think sort of as an organisational whole, we're trying to get much better at presenting the whole picture to everybody, regardless really of what we're specifically asking them to fund or support, because it's the whole organisation together that has the impact. So.
How wonderful. What a sort of really meaningful way of actually bringing those supporters right up close to that, that the other areas of work that the organisation is doing. Thank you. Lisa, from your point of view at RADA, are there ways or examples that you've experienced of sort of connecting donors, supporters, partners to that impact in more meaningful ways?
Definitely. I mean, the thing at the top is we've got to continue to bring our storytelling to the top of our work in really creative and different ways. So thinking about, how do we broaden out our social media storytelling? How do we capture and communicate that student through to alumni journey? And how do we develop our advocates and our ambassadors to help us tell the story? And, a small example this year is it's our 120th anniversary year. And so this year we are capturing 120 stories of impact from across the organisation, and then looking to, use those to share that story of the impact, the very broad impact that the organisation has. So I think it's definitely storytelling, but also other things like very bespoke engagement plans and reporting and experiences and insights for our supporters based around their particular areas of interest. And that can be quite a journey for an organisation, because it's about becoming comfortable about opening up behind the scenes and feeling comfortable about providing some of those insights that perhaps you haven't been providing in the past. And you mentioned before, Deborah, about the conduit, and I think one thing that the team and I are often talking about and reminding ourselves about is that we are actually just, as fundraisers, simply the conduit between our supporters and the impact that their investment is having and brings. So for me, it's about how do we bring those impact stories, which can often be our very best kept secrets. How do we bring them to the surface and allow those stories to speak for themselves, really?
Oh, how wonderful, Lisa. Yeah, absolutely agree. And as you were talking there, I was thinking about that it is about an opening up on both sides. It's an invitation, isn't it, to be part of enabling that work. And if the invitation to the donor or the partner or the sponsor is to contribute financially and perhaps through other, skills, in kind, etc., then really the organisation also has to be open to sharing in return. And, touching on what Steph mentioned earlier, spending that time with supporters to connect them to the difference their philanthropy makes actually serves to boost engagement and also to build loyalty, and to hopefully then be able to take those supporters and partners on a journey and perhaps even grow their support over time. And you're right, Lisa. I think, for many organisations, that shift is a tricky one, and it creates a tension, and also, of course, it requires resource. Because ultimately, fundraising is all about relationships. This we know to be true, and relationships take time and investment of energy, which really brings me on to my next question, I guess, which is about the culture of fundraising, which we know is, an essential for any cultural organisation looking to raise money. Edward, I wonder if I can come to you on this point. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you would describe a good culture of fundraising within an organisation, and how you think that culture can be really beneficial to connecting supporters to that organisational purpose.
Well, I think I'll approach this with two separate lenses. One's an internal one, one's an external one, if that's okay. First of all, the internal one, I think no matter the size of your organisation, I think transparency, ownership, participation and engagement in all aspects of the business, which includes income, no matter what your role is absolutely pivotal. And that means being transparent about management accounts and the state of your business, making sure staff have have the language to be able to understand those things and have conversations about the areas of their work that affects that, and how their input and impact can impact the economy of the business, especially with fundraising. Because I mean, for organizations like ours, you know, 75 to 90% of what we all do is activity driven with a delivery point. It's essential that all those people doing the delivery have a really good understanding of how we get to that point, and also what comes out the other side of it that's beyond the person participating as part of the organizational whole. So that's the internal lens. I think the most important takeaway for me on the external lens, which is an exceptionally simple thing, is not to treat any of your stakeholders any differently. People have different needs, people have different behaviors, but essentially if you're working to a purpose-led, values-driven approach and a values-driven organization, those conversations about what you do as a business, how you act, what your output is, what your impact is, all of those kind of things should be exactly the same, whether it's a volunteer or a member of the community or somebody coming on a learning trip or a key funder or an individual giver or whatever. And that for me is the bottom line. If you're treating anybody any differently, you're probably veering away from your values. And I'd question whether that's the right approach.
Thanks, Edward. And certainly, as you've articulated that there, that really speaks to what you were saying earlier about that democratization being sort of one of your kind of core values and commitments. So that really comes through. Steph, of course, as you mentioned with the watermill, given that huge change in funding, it really did put the focus on the income, I'm sure, for all people working across the organization. How would you sort of describe the best way of trying to therefore take that opportunity and actually engage the wider staff with how fundraising connects to purpose? What did you give us some examples perhaps of how you found a way to draw people who are working in different teams perhaps into that funding conversation, so that there is that understanding and that culture of fundraising has built in turn?
Yeah, I think it has been a real challenge. I mean, I think, in every organisation, everyone is very busy and everyone is very focused on their role. And it has been a real challenge for us to ensure that everybody understands the importance of fundraising. And I completely echo everything that Edward has said there. I think it's really, really important that everyone has a full understanding, of the wider budget and not just of what the fundraising income needs are, but sort of how that fits into the whole organisation. I mean, for us, what we've done is done some really practical things, like we have a company meeting every fortnight, which is every member of staff comes, everyone that's on site. And we all just give a very quick update on where we're at with things. And for me, I've tried to make sure that within that, we're not just telling the staff about what we're doing, but we're telling the staff about why we're doing it. And we're sharing successes with them. And we're making sure that they understand why we're doing the thing that we're doing. I think it's really key that, when we have sort of case studies come through, that we share them internally as well as externally. And again, with our volunteer base, all of our front of house ushers are volunteers, and making sure again that they have an understanding of, maybe not necessarily all the numbers, but an understanding of the whole and what the purpose is and what that means for the organisation, and what the fundraising need is, because those are the people that are meeting people day to day. I'm not there in the theatre foyer every day to meet potential donors and chat to them. So I'm very reliant and have a very tiny team on the wider staff to support us, and to ensure that we are having these conversations with audience members, with participants, with everybody, because they are the beneficiaries of our work, but also the potential donors that might support us in the future. So making sure that everyone has that clarity of purpose means that then, in theory, whoever you're having your conversation with as a visitor or as an audience member, you'll be getting a similar response in terms of what the need is and what impact you can have if you choose to support us. So.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Steph. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I've been in organisations previously where there have been asks that people are making perhaps at a box office or in a front of house setting, and there's a real difference, I think, between the ask being we need support because we are a charity versus this is the work that we do and the difference it makes, and therefore philanthropy is, you know, a very important part of making that happen. Those two things are night and day, and I think they are the difference between somebody giving a one-off donation of £1 versus somebody giving maybe £5 or £10 and feeling genuinely like they are part of something and perhaps even want to know more and get closer. And so I think, you know, taking that time to share that fundraising activity, to share the difference it makes, to share why people are giving with individuals working across an organisation. Of course, nothing happens overnight, and you know, you probably will have to keep repeating those messages. But I think over time, it does start to permeate, and people do start to see it as being part and parcel of, you know, the organisation's relationship with the wider public and communities, and also can see that they themselves have got a role to play in furthering that, which in itself is, again, far more rewarding, I think. I'm conscious that we've talked quite a lot, of course, about fundraising and contributed income, and perhaps a little less about earned income. And Lisa, I really wanted to touch on one of the areas of RADA's work that is very much in that earned income space, but which is fundamentally driven by organisational purpose, which is, of course, RADA Business. And I wonder, when you are, as an organisation, when you're thinking about that area of work, and also when you're telling the story of the wider work of RADA, perhaps to funders, how do you find that sort of that story around the earned income strand and how it furthers your purpose? How does that perhaps strengthen your income generation sort of story for potential partners?
Yes, it absolutely does, Deborah. And by explaining to people that all of the profits from RADA Business go back into RADA to help us, you know, achieve that organisational purpose. When you explain that to people, that really chimes with them and really pulls on the heartstrings, I think, in a way that then you can go on to talk about RADA and, you know, the impact that we have and the, what we're achieving for the creative industry sector and the talent pipeline and changing people's lives through that. And that all of a sudden it kind of makes sense for people that there is this commercial arm of the organisation, but it's there, you know, and those profits come through to RADA. So yeah, it's really, really important that both those aspects of the organisation are actually working to achieve the same outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I think for anyone watching who perhaps isn't familiar with RADA Business, first of all, go and take a look and check it out. You know, it's a really interesting model, I think, not least because it is fundamentally, of course, it's using elements of your organizational purpose, the sort of the skills and expertise that the organization has within itself, but it's using and leveraging those resources in a different way to generate income from a different source versus the main thrust, of course, of your activity. But it is ultimately enabling you to further your purpose, as you say, Lisa. Of course, that, you know, the profits from that business are coming back into the organisation to help deliver your main thrust of work. Edward, I wonder, from your perspective, if you'd have any advice for an organisation that is starting to think more about earned income opportunities, perhaps sort of non-traditional, so maybe not sort of ticket sales or bars and catering, but an organisation that's thinking about how it might approach new earned income streams, but keeping that organisational purpose at the heart of that decision making?
I suppose, oh gosh, that's a very difficult question, Deborah. Thank you. There's an awful lot to consider around that, isn't it? And I mean, I think first and foremost is just having that purpose-led approach in mind at all times and being open to opportunities. I think that what RADA really demonstrates is the ability to work with the assets that you've got and are available to you without it being a distraction from what they do as their core business. So, for example, what Lisa's team are doing in my eyes, and congratulations, Lisa. I mean, I've known about RADA Business for years. I think it's an absolutely brilliant model, is using the best of their teaching creative talent to help fund that business model. And that's a marriage made in heaven, really, in terms of trying to drive that commercial business, because it also reinforces the message. For an organisation like mine, it would be around how we can support the world of healthcare and well-being and community. And again, that's something that we're really only just embarking on, to be honest with you. But if we keep the laser focus around those things, then I think, like Lisa, we stand a really good chance of success. And my own experience of working in cultural organisations for this amount of time is that culture professionals are generally outgoing and exceptionally willing, but they don't really want to harm what's at the core of them, which is their creative abilities and their talent or their expertise, be it in collections care or around the history of medicine or acting or music or whatever. And so long as you're not doing anything at detriment to that, they'll generally go with you. And I think that's ground really worth exploring.
Thank you, Edward. I'm so sorry for putting that question to you right at the end there. Yeah, I completely agree. And I think, for me, the starting point is looking at those assets and really understanding what they are in terms of people, expertise, knowledge of certain audiences and communities, buildings, facilities, spaces, and taking that as your starting point. But I think, again, for me, what's really important is keeping purpose on the table as you're thinking about what the opportunities might be. Because ultimately, you could go off and create, I don't know, an Airbnb, for example, that might generate some income. But is that activity really going to add anything to your organisational purpose? Probably not. And also, again, to your point, Edward, as creative people, I think we get excited by creative things. And there is an exciting and interesting challenge there, or a provocation for any organisation to think, how do we take what exists, leverage it in a creative way, and actually, hopefully, further purpose in the process, but enable us to also tap into other income streams. And I certainly will say, the work that we do at Achates, we're doing a lot more work in this space than ever. And I think that is in part due to the fact that, Edward, you mentioned it earlier, it is a very, very tough climate out there in terms of fundraising. Trusts and foundations in particular, we are hearing the same challenging success rates that you alluded to earlier. So I think now is the moment for the sector to be bold and to think differently. And hopefully, there's some exciting work to be done in the process.
I absolutely agree. And just coming back to that is that it's an area of ownership for everyone. It's not down to a fundraising team or a trading team to just come up with ideas on how to drive that income. And actually the ideas that come from the creative, professionally driven areas of the business are probably going to put you in better stead.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I really couldn't agree more. Thank you. I am really sad to say that we're at time, unfortunately. Just wanted to take the moment really to just say a huge thank you to Edward, to Lisa, and to Steph. It is a huge topic, and I'm sure we could talk more for hours, and possibly even look at doing another session a little further down the line on this topic. But I hope that it's been an interesting sort of dipping of a toe, perhaps, into thinking about organisational purpose and thinking about fundraising through this lens. Our next Achates live session will be in March. It'll be the second Thursday of March. So please keep an eye on your inboxes, and we'll be in touch to let you know further detail about that really soon. In the meantime, though, if you have got other thoughts or maybe even questions that you would like to explore together with peers, then feel free to continue the conversation over on Achates Community. And of course, in the meantime, if you would like to get in touch with us directly to talk about your own purpose-led approach to your income generation, then please feel free to reach out. You can email us on info@achates.org.uk. So there's really nothing else for me to say other than a huge thank you for joining us this afternoon, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.